Hi there, welcome to part one of a series that I'm calling Bedtime Stories from Your Girlfriend. I really do hope you enjoy this. It will be a series completely neutral where I simply just tell bedtime stories from memory. If you like this and would like to see more content, you can check out some links down in the description. And if you'd like access to more exclusive content as well as more adult themed stuff, there is a link to my Patreon down below. I hope you enjoy. Hey, baby. What's going on? Something bothering you? You can't sleep. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Is there something I could do to maybe help you fall asleep? You want to hear a story? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can tell you a bedtime story. Believe it or not, yeah, I'm capable of telling a story from memory. You're funny. Okay. Do me a favor. Close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths. Just like that. Nice. Do a couple more. And just lean back into your nice, comfy bed. Okay? Good. I'll tell you a story. A long time ago, in a very, very far off realm, there was a woman named Genevieve from a very, very rich family. She grew up the sister of 12 siblings. I know, big family. And, she lived her first few years in the lap of luxury, dealing with the struggles that came with being a noble in such a prestigious area. And by the way, this is in the realm of dragons and magic and whatnot. And she was happy for the most part. But when she became 12 years old, some changes started developing in her body. And no, not the normal puberty changes. These ones were a bit more visually present, we'll say. And within the next few months, she would develop horns. Her feet shifted to hooves. Her skin turned from a beautiful, perfect pale to a more lavender purple. The whites of her eyes grew black, and the lightest green hazel became a brilliant, fiery yellow. But even with all this, she was still her. But her father never saw it that way. Every time he looked at her, he only saw a monster. And hid her away because of this. Very similar to Harry Potter, yes. And she spent the next 6 years locked away in her room, reading books of adventure and fairy tales, or even just something that is non-fictional, of some of the mystical things that were outside of her little room, of dragons and monsters and adventures that constantly called to those who were daring enough. And eventually, she built up the courage one night to, with the clothes on her back and a small tiny knapsack full of basic supplies, formed a little rope to go down from her window and leave the grounds of the family estate, never looking back. And when she did that night, she dropped her name, no longer Genevieve Latois, but just Naki. She was a sweet girl. Always grew up with a decent sense of morals, mostly taught to her by her mother. And, well, those books of chivalrous knights and daring princes wishing to rescue princesses from castles and dastardly villains had kind of instilled a very distinct kind of moral compass for her. And she was not exactly prepared for the world around her, especially looking the way she was. It was not very common for someone to be like her, and it was even less common for someone to treat her kindly because of this. But she took the time to learn how to fight with a sword. She worked out constantly and did her best to train rigorously in order to apply to be an adventurer in the local Adventurers Guild. And it was actually on her first job that she met 3 other friends that would be so important to her life. The first of her 3 new friends would be an interesting young man, similar to her own age, by the name of Chiron. And Chiron was a human, natural as the day is long, and he too was a pretty sweet boy. But at the same time, he was not from this country, nor this land. He came from a very, very far off place, far across a deep, vast ocean, and had instilled in him a sense of honor and a appreciation for the dragons that roamed the world. And because of this code of honor and this fascination with dragons, him and Naki became, well, 2 peas in a pod. Very close overall. The best of friends. The second person on this journey was an interesting girl by the name of Snowbird. And oddly enough, she was not a bird, but more akin to a cat. But instead of being your typical feline house cat, she stood on 2 legs. Beautiful white Mancoon-like fur, and she was quick with her fists, and a little bit quicker with her wit. Always happy to lay down a joke, but at the same time, her history of growing up in a monastery had really given her a good fundamental of how to fight off the evils of the world, and at the same time, how to tell right from wrong. And finally, there was the strangest of this circle of friends. A much older man, human too, by the name of Carl. It's funny, these outlandish names, and then there's just Carl. And he's, at least by appearance, wasn't very much to look at. An older, maybe about late 30s, early 40s, disheveled man who had clearly been walking the world and had many years on his life, and it showed. But at the same time, he had such weird fascinations with certain things. He would talk to the stars and seemingly was obsessed with the idea of understanding how time worked. His idea of what was right from wrong was a little bit more skewed than the other 3, but at the same time, he usually kept to himself and was happy to go along with the others. So very often, well, we'll get to that. But early on, their first job was that there was a local farmstead nearby that was dealing with some troubled wolves. And these wolves were a bit more daring than normal. They were acting out of normal. And so when this group of new adventurers and new friends came together and sought out this interesting development, they noticed that the wolves were almost like zombies. They were acting very erratic, with horrible, scary visages. But this group found the group of wolves that were the problem and decided to take care of them right away, mostly by the end of a blade, and slayed the beasts. They took one of the bodies of a wolf back, and they brought it back into the city for study to understand what was wrong with it. It was at this time that they learned that these wolves were afflicted with a terrible curse, and that apparently it was reminiscent of a flower that grew very far up north. So, with not much of a lead, and the Adventurers Guild willing to pay for them to further up on this mission, they decided to head out and see what was what. So, with not much besides a small handful of coins, the clothes on their backs, the food that they procured, and a very terrible condition wagon, they set off. And about 3 days up on their journey towards the north, they encountered a group of dwarves. 2 of them, actually. They were storytellers, and they were looking around to do research. Apparently there was a nearby dwarven mine that was lost to time and was sought to have untold riches. So, these 4 decided to take a momentary break on their journey and check out what these ruins might have for them, and at the same time help these dwarves on understanding what was going on. So, diving deep, deep down into this dastardly, scary, dark tomb, the group of 4 found themselves in front of what looked to be some undead, which in this world isn't entirely uncommon inside of a crypt, but it does warrant concern. And they fought their way down deeper and deeper, through trials and tribulations and a few scary moments. But finally reaching the bottom of this oh so very scary crypt, they found a young woman who appeared to have lost her mind, more or less. She was awake and aware for centuries, and held only together by a magic ring. And with the ominous looming threat of violence on the horizon, well, Carl had some quick thinking and decided it would be best to, well, stop the magic supply from the ring. So he cast a quick-witted spell right onto that ring, cut off the magic from her, and soon after she crumbled to dust, rescuing the group from what would have been a very nasty fight that they were well not prepared for. And it was down here that they stumbled upon 3 things that was crucial to their later adventures. The first was a book of stories, old dwarven tales that were actually forgotten to time. They were written by one of the greatest dwarven fairy tale writers at the time. And so they held on to that book and eventually would give it back to the same dwarves that they traveled with for a wonderful reward. Mostly monetary, though. The other 2 items that helped them was, one was a little bit less outright noticeable. It was a horn, and when they blew into this horn, a massive wave of sound would release and to break apart anything in its path. But it did not hurt a soul. At least no living soul. And last but not least, a sword for our little Naki. This sword was old, but it was so well maintained. There were runes etched into the side in an old, dead language, and magic emanating deep from within the sword's blade. It called to her, and she felt a source of strength come with that blade. And so she decided to hold on to it, near and dear to her heart. And it was in that moment that when they came out of that crypt and headed up north, they reached the great big city of the dwarves, a deep underground fortress miles and miles wide and long. A beautiful place that was filled with so much life, love, and industry. So many beautiful fascinations of ingenious inventions and bar fights and family magics and so much more. But this group of 4 had a job to do. And seeing this on you, and seeing how tired you are now, I think it's time we leave the rest of that for another night. I know you can't hear me, but sweet dreams, darling. We'll pick this up next time.